Live from the Talking Joe Studios, it's Talking Joe.
Talking Joe is on the air.
Hey, welcome to Talking Joe. It's me, Mark. And today we are bringing you another interview with an important person from the history of G.I. Joe, because today joining us is Nelson Nel Yomtov. Nel is known for his work at Marvel Comics, where he was from 1975 to 1996 as a writer, colorist, editor, and more. For G.I. Joe, he colored many issues, including a couple from the main run, but G.I. Joe Special Missions, G.I. Joe Order of Battle, G.I. Joe versus Transformers, and as a tangent, I believe he also colored the whole 80-issue run of Transformers. Nel played a critical role in the history of G.I. Joe as his role of Director of Product Development in Marvel's licensing division, where he was responsible for G.I. Joe licensing when it was launched. We'll find out a bit more about that and more when we talk to him in just a second. And joining me to do that is Tim Finn.
Hello, Mark. How are you? Hello, viewers, listeners. Let's bring in our guest.
Right. So joining us, here he is. It's Nel Yomtov.
Hey guys, good to see you. Thanks for having me aboard.
Hi Nel, thanks for joining us.
We
great to have you here and with us.
We usually start with where are you? And can you tell us what that cool thing is behind you on the wall that looks like comic art?
Oh, it is. The color piece, if you can read it, that says Stark.
Wait, I know what that is. Can I guess?
Yes.
That's Mark Chiarello's back cover to The Many Armors of Iron Man.
The front cover. But
front cover.
Props to you. Yes.
Okay, for our listeners, that is an early Marvel collection, and it has 8 or 9 issues of Iron Man, not all in a row,
right.
Featuring first appearances or spotlighting particular armor. There was a new printing of it maybe 12 years ago that had, I think, a Bob Layton cover.
Oh.
With a bunch of Iron Mans flying at you.
I was editing Iron Man at the time, and decided to do a trade paperback collecting the Armors issues. And Mark is one of my dearest friends, and I know him for many, many years. And I called him, and he said, "Well, what do you want?" I said, "Well, I don't want a traditional, him flying or that kind of thing, because one of the main objectives that we were trying to do at that time, this was probably 91 and 92, somewhere in there. We wanted to try to have a bigger presence in bookstores, Barnes and Noble, and whoever else was around at the time, Borders. So I wanted to go to something a bit more adulty, a bit more dramatic and stuff. So I proposed to Mark this idea of an old Russian type propaganda thing, kind of socialist, communist kind of, man at work kind of thing. And he took it and ran with it. He did all the Art Deco kind of lettering and stuff, but he captured exactly what I had wanted. And ironically, images of this appear in the lead-ins to some of the Marvel superhero movies. I believe the Iron Man movie, and maybe some of the others. It may be the same lead-in to each movie. But yeah, that was that was great. That's just that Mark won't give me the painting or sell it to me, so that's just a really high quality print. And next to it, the black and white piece, which if you could zoom in on that, like you did on Mark's piece, it's real interesting. Yeah, it's that piece there. You may not be able, you can't see it, but it's Moses on the mountain receiving the 10 Commandments. It was an office gag. That art was done by Maurice Severin. It was an office gag that we did in the years that I was in the bullpen. So figure around 76 or 77. At the time, we were doing a lot of reprints of cult classic fiction, with whatever, all major, titles and stuff. And Marie, in the spirit of her being just an office goofball, decided to do this. And she said, well, let's do a book based on the Talmud. So she did that, and again, it was never published. It wasn't meant for. It was just an office thing, and it reads the ultimate classic, retold in the mighty Marvel manner. And she did the whole thing. She mocked in all the Hebrew types lettering and the word Talmud, and she mocked it up like a cover that we would send off to the printer to do the. We were doing these these retellings of classic literature. And she signed it and gave it to me and stuff. She was a very, very dear friend of mine. I worked physically very close to her, and also we had a close working relationship.
Is that a logo right below that?
Yeah, that I can take it off the wall if it helps.
Sure.
Okay.
Cool.
I'm a huge fan of hand lettering, and this is a piece that appeared as the next issue blurb in one of the Iron Man books I was editing, Armored and Dangerous.
Cool.
And it was done by Jack Morelli, who's again, between Jack, Mark, and myself, we're kind of like an unholy trio. We're very, very, very close. And Jack's one of the great letterers in comics. He still does a lot of comic lettering.
He's at Archie, right?
He's at yeah, very good, yeah. And whenever I would always treat as an editor when guys would, do pieces like this, and we just like reduce it down and, glue it on, paste it onto the original artboard. But they do it up large and you shoot it down. I always treated these as pieces of art because I have such respect for the craft, and I'd always return it to the letterers. This is yours. It's not mine. And I did with Jack, and many years passed, and we did many things together. We traveled together and stuff. And I said, you know what? One of the most beautiful pieces of art that I ever handled was that, and he mailed it to me. And Oh, he wrote here, title for Chapter 4 of Iron Man number 300, signed Jack. So that's where it comes from.
That's great.
Yeah.
Funny enough, you were talking.
I'm sorry.
Funny enough, you were talking about sort of like Soviet era propaganda posters, and I had as my sort of thumbnail art for this very episode a picture of you and the Chaotix, which I believe was posed to be in that style, and I've tweaked the coloring so it's kind of the red and yellow. The photo is by Michael Sullivan.
Yes.
That Larry posted this just last week on his Facebook. Left to right, Nelson Yomtov, Rick Mason, Jim Albrice, Gary Helgren, and Larry Hammer with MD Bright in front.
Yeah.
Should we linger on this? Can you tell us a little bit about the Chaotix and how that all came about?
We started out as the Burning Sensations, and we did that for a couple of years. Interesting, there was a slight change in the personnel. One of the the original founders of the band was Bobby London, who you guys may know as a cartoonist. His work appeared for many. He did Dirty Duck, was his claim to fame. Dirty Duck appeared, I guess, in Underground Comics and also in National Lampoon, the first years of National Lampoon being released. Very clever guy and a really good songwriter. We were the Burning Sensations, and we did gigs and stuff. We had a lot of fun gigs, and Bobby left. We had a little switch around of personnel and stuff. Jim Olbrist was the only non-comic book guy. His occupation, he hung Venetian blinds. That was his occupation, and still is, from what I understand. Gary Holgren is a well-known painter, cover paintings for commercial magazines. Larry, you guys know, and Mark, really good buddy. He's a bass player and just an incredible artist. He's one of my favorite Iron Man artists of all time. I'm sorry, I did one issue for me when I was editing. I think it may have been a fill-in to help me out. But is
that when John Byrne's writing it around 273?
I think Byrne was. It may have been a stopgap in between Byrne and Kev Hopgood.
It's when Paul Ryan was the regular artist.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
I'm
Paul
sorry.
Ryan, because 275 was double sized. I think
Yeah.
that's what that was.
Yeah. And it was only the one that he did. I begged him, but he said, he wasn't the greatest on time. Mark was, some guys really labor over their work, and you're glad when you get the babies, but he knew he was a deadline issue. And he said, no, I said, I don't want to disappoint you, but he did the one. It was gorgeous. I think maybe, gosh, I forgot who was inking regularly at the time, but it was a beautiful looking book. I forgot who was inking. And so we played numerous gigs, and we lasted a long time. I was the drummer in the band, and I was with the band for about 10 or 11 years. But my real passion was playing harmonica. So I left the band after that time. I set him up with another drummer, and I formed a blues band that we played, must have been for 2 or 3 years. And then, I gave that up. But the Gary, I sent that photo to the guys doing the, oh man, names of escaping me now. But I sent that photo. I may have sent that to Larry also at one point. But yeah, that's us playing at the Marvel Christmas party. Carson, I sent this photo to Carson when he interviewed me. And that's us at the Marvel Christmas party at the Marvel offices, probably in about 83 or so. Mark wasn't with us at the time. Jim in the background is playing bass, and Larry is playing guitar.
How often did the Chaotix practice? How often did the Chaotix play?
We practiced twice a week for years, whether or not we had a gig coming up. And we played maybe 8 to 10 times a year. So, and that's another photo. I think I sent that to that too is a photo of Elliot Brown. This was a big gig for us. This was done at the Irving Plaza, which was a really nice venue, kind of in Greenwich Village. And it was a Halloween party for an artist collective. People had come from Europe. I mean, there may be some convention going on at the time, but they asked us to play. The fellow on the extreme left was our original bass player. His name was Todd. Next to him is Bobby London. And then there's Brick, Gary, Larry, and myself. This was our big gig. We practiced for months to do this, and we were going to do 2 sets. This was big time for us. It was hundreds of people dancing in a really well-known venue. And they cut us off after the first set. We were going back on stage for the second set. And the sound guys started taking down the equipment. I was saying, what's going on? Said, well, we've only been booked for X amount of hours, and time's up, guys. That was pretty much in line with what the Chaotix was about. But, the fact that we rehearsed twice a week for years, month after month, without playing a real lot, it just kind of, was testimony to the way we felt about each other as friends.
Nell, where did you practice?
We rented a studio in what was called the Music Building on 8th Avenue and I think 39th Street, Manhattan. That area of New York was the center of the garment district for many years. And from what we understand, the building was once rooms for heavy industry shops that made ladies' garments and things like that, neckties and apparel. And the building was sold and was broken up into small units, small rooms, and it was just all music. And every room had amplifiers and drums and everything. And we'd see guys going in and out of the building who I knew, were recording, people I would see, play on stage and stuff. Some named guys and ladies, and it was just a cheap, way of having regular recording space rather than pay, $20 or $50 an hour in a real fancy studio. We paid collectively maybe $200 a month, for that space. And then when I left the band, the guy sublet, the Chaotix sublet to my band that space.
Was there this this was a hobby. This was more than a hobby because this was also a passion. But you were not trying to get a record deal, right? This was a fun thing you did on the side, or was there some hope?
No, solely, Tim. You're right. This was something that we just enjoyed doing. We enjoyed being together. Among the wives and the girlfriends, they just thought it was a hoot. These guys, and we made good music. When we individually, Jim was musically trained. Jim Obrist. I forgot where he went, but he went to school and he studied music. He was a serious musician, and he plays serious jazz now. And we were lucky to get him because he was the guy who was really trained in music. The rest of us, I never took a drum lesson in my life. I just, I was self-taught, and I was by no means great, but I was, for the level of skill, I was fine for the band. No one was really outstanding, but we had a lot of fun. We were real energetic. The tunes were, the original tunes were sarcastic and snipey and funny, we thought. And I think we connected with audiences. And we did loft parties to raise rent for some guys. It was the venues we did, which were just unusual kind of things. But we were always, but no, we knew who we were. We had no misapprehensions about becoming anything with this. It was just pure fun. I loved it. The other band that I started technically was a better band, but it was in no way, I didn't enjoy it anywhere near the way I enjoyed playing with Larry and the guys.
My last Chaotix question. All the songs that you performed were original that the band wrote, or did you do some covers?
Covers. I'd say it was probably 25% covers. They were all danceable, but some of the covers were really intended to be party kind of things. So I think we did maybe some Lou Reed in the Cars and a Chuck Berry or two, some real identifiable songs. Larry not surprising, wrote a couple of the kind of epic songs. I don't know how to describe them. I think one was called Rock and Roll, and it was about the band, the guys in the band itself, and about becoming a rock star and that kind of thing. He wrote a couple of really good songs, and then Brick wrote songs. Everyone wrote songs. I didn't. I'm not a songwriter, but everyone else in the band, even Mark wrote a couple of tunes that we did. Everyone wrote songs, but I didn't. I was too concerned about keeping the beat.
And Hama, I think Hama started the Chaotix YouTube page and posted 3 videos of the band performing. I think that's Hama.
Yeah,
and years ago.
Oh, I wonder if it's around. I'll try to check it out. It was I don't remember while I was with the band was being videoed. We did some recordings, but so it was probably in the years that I was gone. Yeah, I'll check it out. But I don't. We had a reunion. Oh man, it must be 8 or 10 years by now. At Larry's apartment in the city, he had a huge, I think it was a duplex. I'm not sure. Kind of in the area of the World Trade Center, and it was just we hadn't seen each other for many years, most of us anyway. It was a pretty emotional thing, and we played, and it was a really emotional, wonderful kind of thing. The wives came and the whole thing.
I think Larry posted a photo from this on his Facebook after it happened.
There I don't know. I can get it to you guys if you want. I know I have a video because there were videos taken that day, but I remember Mark or Larry posting on YouTube a video. I don't know, maybe if you search Larry Hama Chaotix on YouTube, you'll find something. But there was a couple of, videos that we put on of that historic day. And then years later, we had another one, a much smaller one in a recording studio. It was just a small one. But the one at Larry's apartment was this big, it was this great bacchanalia. It was just a wonderful kind of thing, seeing everybody together.
And did
It was-
you sort of, because most of you were from like working in comics at the time, was it sort of one was the day job, another one was the fun side,
Yeah,
hobby, passion?
yeah, that's what it was.
Or was there much thinking about comics and things when you were doing the band, or when you were in the band it was all band?
No, it was the band. It was the band, and at that time I was already in the licensing division of special projects. So I had a lot of contact with the comics, but I was no longer in the process of producing comics. And it just started in such a weird way. My office was next to Larry's. I was in, and if I'm getting off track or being too long-winded, please tell me. Just let me know. Like one of these. But I was doing special projects and licensing. They wanted, and I was kind of dressing up, for the role because I was seeing clients and things like that. So I had one or two suits that I just wore to shreds that I would wear. And management wanted me upstairs. Marvel was on 2 or 3 stories at the time, 2 or 3 floors. They wanted me upstairs with the execs, which is where I belong because it was licensing and had really little to do with the production of comics. But I insisted, no, I have to be downstairs. I have to be near all the art files. I just didn't want to go upstairs. So I was coming in these, suited up for the occasion. And Larry was right next door to me, and he was editing Crazy at the time. Maybe also Conan, but certainly Crazy. And we knew each other. We stuck our heads in each other's office and stuff. And I was in his office one day, and he was talking, and may have been to Gary or Bobby London. They were talking about getting together and playing music. And I asked Gary, I said, Larry, I know you guys got a band. So, yeah, he said, we're trying to get together, but it's been slow and stuff. He said, do you play? I said, well, I played drums in junior high school. But that was 20 years ago. And I hadn't played school. And I had a snake. He said, you want to be in a band? And I said, sure. And we had our first rehearsal. I remember I brought my snare drum to the studio, and it was a studio that we rented at that building that I told you about for an evening. And it was the seeds of us getting together. And we just said, we're going to start a band. I had no business playing regularly with anyone. But, it was in the spirit of, hey, we're just going to have fun. And we couldn't get it off the ground. I know this guy, he'll come and this guy will come. But we need a lead singer. Larry said, he can't do it. I said, I certainly can't sing. Gary, he couldn't do it. We were waiting for this guy, Brick Mason. So, and I didn't know. I didn't know Gary. I didn't even know Bobby. I knew their work, but I had never met any of them. But I had been, fans of their work for years. And they said, we have to wait for Brick Mason because he's going to be our lead singer. I go, who's Brick Mason? Well, he's this. Well, where is he? He lives in. Well, where is he? I know he lives in this. Where is he? He was a storybook artist, and he was out of town doing storyboards for the movie Annie. And so this is 84 or something like this. So, well, that's incredible. So we waited a few weeks until he came back to the city, and the band started, and we just threw ourselves into it, just like head first. Some covers at first, and the guy had an idea for a song, and it just kind of swelled, and it just became, this kind of boys' night out kind of thing. But it all just started, from my point of view, as a lark. You want to be in a band? Sure. Who doesn't?
So shall we do the rewind back and find the origin story of how it was that you happened to land at Marvel and be in the position where you're somehow responsible for the licensing of G.I. Joe?
Okay, I'll take up to that. I started at Marvel in 1975. It was a long time ago, and I'm not ashamed to say it was purely an act of nepotism that got me in there. I was working in a toy factory on Long Island, and I was it was I think it was during the summer. It was really hot. And I was coming home just every day, just filthy and dust and whatever. And I was speaking with my mom, and I lived in Queens at the time. My folks lived on Long Island. And she said, "How's it going?" I said, "It's fine." And how's work? It's hot and grimy and, whatever. I finished college. I got a bachelor's degree in psychology. So I finished college. So this was, within a year or so after I finished college, 2 years or so. And I was just slumming around. I delivered phone books for a job, and I just doing art. I worked in a vegetable store. I was just, figuring out what I wanted to do. And what I basically wanted to do was save up enough money and just go back for my master's. So my mother was just, like old Jewish mothers. She said, "Oh, you're working so hard." And, she calls me one day. She said, "I spoke to your uncle Danny." Danny was Danny Crespi. Danny Crespi was the head letterer at Marvel on staff at the time and had been for several years. She's my mom's brother. Danny I was very close to Danny and his kids because we all came from the Bronx. Danny still lived in the Bronx. My parents no longer did, and I didn't, but I was very close to Danny. His son and I were very close. He had a younger son who was like my younger brother. And she said, "I spoke to Uncle Danny, and I told him, the plight that you're enduring and you're suffering. And I asked him if he had any jobs, if there were any jobs at Marvel. And he said, "Well, we're looking for someone to do paste ups and mechanicals. Did Neil ever do that?" So my mother told me I knew nothing about Marvel. So my mother told me, and I spoke to Danny, and I said, "Yeah." I said, "I did that on college publications, and in high school I did paste ups and mechanicals. I was on the high school newspaper, and I did literary magazines in college and stuff. So I did those basic kind of thing." So they got me an interview, and I met Saul Brodsky. And I tell you guys, I didn't know anything about. I read DCs when I was a kid, when they were 10 cents. When they went up to 12 cents, that was it. It blew my economics of what I could do with a quarter. See, with a quarter at 10 cents, I bought 2 comics and 5 pieces of Bazooka bubblegum. When I went up to 12 cents, it was just like 1 piece of gum isn't going to cut it. That was it. That when people say, "When did you stop reading?" Whatever month DC went to 12 cents, that was it. It was my last comic thing. And I was a Batman and Flash guy and Justice League guy, and I bought them very regularly. And when we finished, we just passed them around the neighborhood. So I went up to meet Saul Brodsky, and we talked and everything. This was, I think, early December of 75, and he said, "Sure, we'll give you a shot." And during the interview, he said, "Well, what do you know about comics?" And I said, "I read them as a kid." And he thought that was amusing. He said, and I told him, I've never read a Marvel comic, so and I got to admit to you, in college, friends were pushing, one guy in particular, a hippie type guy like myself, was trying to push Doctor Strange on me. So that would have been 72, 73, whoever was doing, maybe Frank Brunner. I don't know who was doing it at the time. But I just said, "Get away. Just leave me alone. Just take this and go away. And grow up, by the way." So Saul hires me, but he hires me on a trial basis. And he really hired me only because I was Danny's nephew. I mean, I did paste ups and mechanicals, but I'm sure millions of other kids who did paste ups and mechanicals and new comics, he could have gotten also. So he did it as a favor to Danny. So he hires me on a temporary basis in mid-December. And he says, "You come in twice a week, and we'll see how you make out, and blah, blah, blah. If you learn whatever we need to teach you." So I stopped going to my toy job on Long Island, and I went into this city. So the new year comes around, and they hire me like the first week of January. Sure, we'll bring you on. Years later, I was to learn that the reason he just didn't flat out hire me in December was because they didn't want to pay me holiday time for the Christmas. And then as I got to know Saul, it was just like, "Oh, and Stan." I said, "Oh, that makes sense." So they brought me in to do the production work on reprints. That was my job. And also to paste up all the letters pages and the monthly bullpen bulletins. That was my job. But we had quite a few reprints going at the time, maybe an 8 or 9. We were doing superhero stuff. We had Marvel Tales and Marvel Superheroes. And we were doing a Daredevil reprint, and there were the monster things we were doing that did go in Kirby stuff. So it was a lot there was a lot going on. So it was a really busy job. My immediate supervisor was this wonderful lady named Irene Vartanov, who, again, I didn't know at the time, but learned, over time, that she was, really one of the early fan people, who really helped, launch things, get things going, from a fan perspective, fanzines and that kind of thing. And so I sat there, I did my job. I was meeting all these people, Marie Severin, and just all these guys, John Romita. They were sitting next to me. I was having lunch with them, and I didn't know who they were. They were just people I was having lunch with. Marie was a doll. Yeah, she adopted me as like a little underling that she was mentoring. John Romita, we chat baseball. We talked all these other people, Frank Giacoya, Mike Esposito, all these guys, Saul, and I didn't. They were just guys to me. They were just people I liked. Hung out with. We'd have a drink or something like that. It really was over time, and even now, I'm still learning. Like, oh, Saul drew that. Something from the early, from the 50s or so. Same thing with Marie. Marie did that so many years before I got to Marvel, and but I just kind of learned about them, just for being nice people. And I developed a lot of nice relationships with them. One of the most interesting things about the job was Irene was put in charge of organizing the warehouse, which contained all of the original art that Marvel owned at the time. And she said, no, you come down, you help me organize the thing, because the room is a mess. And it was. There were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of 12 by 18 envelopes with artwork in them, thrown randomly, haphazardly, on the floor of this warehouse on, I think it was 21st Street off 6th Avenue, in this really dumpy old industrial building. And it was just a mess. And this was Marvel's legacy on paper. So she did, the lion's share of the work, because I always had to be at the office, doing my regular work on the reprints. But my first readings of many of these comics, including Amazing Fantasy 15, was reading the original boards. Yeah.
Now, where were all of the negatives kept?
The negatives were kept along with the proofs. I don't think they were kept at the warehouse. They were kept at another facility because we needed to have them accessible for reprint purposes. One of the editors would say, we're going to do, this Kirby story on Groot, and he located where it was at. We had to have the negatives, which were rolled proofs, if that's what the form they were in. And they were, I guess we did have negatives, but it was only in black and white in positive form. They were rolled proofs as in tubes.
And each in a negative of a single page or a cover of 11 by 17 art or larger was that same size.
No. The only copies of those, I don't remember negatives of the insides of the books. I remember negatives of the covers at reduced size. Nothing was done that big. They were reduced size, like print size. But the proofs of the books, the interiors of the books, which might have included the ads, I'm not sure, were proofs. They were rolled proofs. There were 4 on the way a printer would do it. I think we was doing like 4 up, and he'd have there would be like these big flats rolled in tubes. They were in a tube because the paper, these large sheets were rolled, and it was on a slick kind of paper. And that was Marvel's library. So in addition to, and believe me, that the originals were by no means complete runs of anything. I mean, there were huge gaps, which kind of makes you wonder who walked off with this, over the years. So you may have, Spider-Man 62, and the next book that showed up was 84. Just like, well, where is that other stuff? Over the years, you kind of learn people pilfering it. Sometimes it was never returned from the printer, because this was all that, these things were returned to Marvel's offices. They'd sit on a shelf at Marvel. And months later, when someone who was my predecessor, the guy I replaced, his job was to take these stuff down to the warehouse. he took it down and just threw it. He literally threw it on the floor of this place. So Irene set up all these metal shelves, and we screw the shelves together. And as I said, she did the lion's share of the work. But I'd be sitting there drinking, having my sandwich for lunch, reading these original boards, big thing. The Kirby Monster stuff, the early superhero stuff, but the Amazing Fantasy, and she was educating me as I was reading it. She said, how important that book was? And she'd tell me about it. So I give her a lot of thanks for, kind of getting me knowledgeable about the early history of Marvel. And so we did that. And I worked in the bullpen for a couple of years, made some really great friends and such. And then about two and a half years into my stay there, Stan was still in New York. He didn't have much to do. Well, he had very little to do with the comics as far as I saw, but he'd stick his head into the bullpen and, chat for us for a while. And I'd have lunch with him occasionally. A couple of us would have lunch with him. He'd invite us in. We went to the same high school at different times. So there was a connection there. So we would sing our high school song together and that kind of thing. I wasn't one of his favorites, but he was always nice and always friendly to me. And I went to him one day, although Saul, my immediate supervisor was Irene. Our group supervisor was John Verporten, who ran the bullpen and was an inker also. Saul was a boss above him. And then ultimately, I guess Stan could call any shot that he wanted to. But like I said, he wasn't very involved. John Verporten was really the boss of the bullpen. And but I went to Stan. I kind of hopped over a couple. I went to Stan. I said, "Look, Stan, I'm doing the bullpen thing, and just there's no place for me to go in the company. If nothing opens up soon, I'm going to probably go back to school." I wasn't telling him that as a threat. I was just kind of hinting, if something opens up, let me know. And he said, "Speak to Solly Brodsky because something's opening up in special projects." So I went to Sol, and Sol was, he said, "Yeah, this guy Bob is leaving. I'm going to need someone. Are you interested in it?" And I said, "Yeah, very much so." And he gave me the job. And a small part of the job, well, half part of the job involved the licensing of product development end of things. At the time, and this reflected back in G.I. Joe later, a few years later, we didn't have a licensing department because we didn't have a real robust licensing program. We had items out there, but it was real haphazard. Deals were made over a handshake, over dinner and stuff. It wasn't a very organized kind of thing. Our licensing agent was Columbia Pictures Merchandising. They had offices a couple of blocks away. And they did licensing not only for Columbia Pictures, but for other companies like ourselves who didn't have big in-house programs. They would do the licensing, meaning they would sell a license and then that was it. There was really no oversight of quality control of products and stuff. So I walked into that. In special projects, we did calendars, we did pocketbooks, anything that wasn't a pure, we did posters. We also did the trade paperbacks at Son of Origins and, those books, The Origins of Marvel, Sons of Origins.
Fireside?
Comics, Marvel Way.
For Fireside, that was the
publisher?
Those
were for Fireside.
So you packaged it, and Fireside actually printed it, actually published it.
Yeah, and sold it into bookstores. The paperback things, we're doing these small size paper.
Is this where you'd put like 2 panels per page, like rearrange a 6-panel grid onto across 3 pages of a tiny paperback?
Yeah, we that was with Grosset and Dunlap. We did Spider-Man, Hulk. We did Conan. A number of titles, maybe FF. We did a number of titles, and yes, that's what we did. So I was handling, the trafficking of that, and making sure that the artwork was getting done, and that it didn't look too silly. And then there was the licensing, aspect of it. But within a couple of years, so I was the contact person for every licensor. Once they signed the deal with Columbia Pictures to say we're going to do Underoos, Marvel Underoos, garments. Columbia Pictures was out of it, and everything went through me. I was the only guy. I was licensed. I was it. I was Marvel's licensing face to the world.
Now,
Yeah.
okay, you had a psychology degree, but not a business degree or not a communications degree. So, did you feel like you had a natural affinity? Did you feel overwhelmed? How did you feel with this new job?
I took it in stride. I'm a reasonably intelligent guy, and but I think I've got a good a sense of working with people, dealing with people. I'm not a hard nose. I look for compromise, where one is called for. I'm fair. I think, I was polite and courteous. I was professional. I had those kind of qualities even without, a degree or training in it.
And then in terms of the actual deals, the dollars and cents, were you helping to make those deals, or were you running that by someone in the business office?
Yeah, I had nothing to do with at the time with the selling of a license. I'd get a contract. Eventually we took that away from. We hired 2 in-house people to do sales in Marvel. So we started building our own licensing department beyond myself. We took that deal away from Columbia Pictures when it lapsed. We got our own licensing department. They would go out and sell licenses. I would get, and contracts would pass through our legal department. So yeah, there was a bit, business legal end of it. I'd get a copy of a contract saying, we've just signed a deal with whoever, XYZ company, to make T-shirts. Okay, fine. From there, I would take it, I would contact those people, tell them what the expectations of the program were, offer my services, whatever you need, art, if you're nearby, I'll come visit your facilities if you like, send in, some of your production people, explain to me the limitations you have, especially with fabric in those days, like bed sheets and T-shirts and stuff like that. Printing was kind of primitive. You really couldn't do a real lot on fabric at the time. Like now you could print, type, 2-point type, and everything is crystal clear, and you could reproduce, amazing imagery. It wasn't that way in, 1980. So I learned through these people, and I did a lot of, research on myself and asking, what I thought were the right questions, especially about printing on fabric and sculpting. What are the limitations of sculpting a Hulk bank head, a plastic head, of sculpting a tiny figure? What can they do? What can't they do? That all figured into the job of me being flexible and understanding what a manufacturer could do with the color of plastic. Well, it's not the exact blue of Spider-Man. I can't reproduce that blue because of that. Okay, let's make a compromise. If you can't do that, we want this product out. We'll make some compromise. I'll pick, another blue, and you tell me if you can do it. So it was a real learning process for me. And this is across a range of hundreds of kinds of products, printing on fabric, plastics, back to school stuff, just tons. And it was an amazing array of products that we had out there.
Were you only traveling around New York for this?
No, I did I was out in the Midwest a few times. I was down in Florida. That was about it.
And you were,
I'm sorry.
You were not going to comic book conventions.
I was going to the licensing conventions, the licensing show. I was out of comics. I was coloring freelance at night. I'd ask the editors, hey, you guys you need a hand, call. Yeah, here's, we got an 8-page backup, could you do? Sure. Because I always wanted to keep my hand in comics. So in a few short years, I really immersed myself in comics, in comic bookdom, in the craft of it, the people involved in it. It's just the whole thing, the history of it. It just became this fascinating thing. A few years earlier, I was doing other stuff. I wasn't following comics. And, you know, I just was, now it was just like, wow, you know, this is really something. And it was the people. Had I not known, you know, the quality and the kind of people that were behind it, it would have been, you know, nice product, you know, to read or something. But I knew the people who were creating this stuff.
Before G.I. Joe shows up, Marvel publishes Star Wars comics, Godzilla, Conan, and Shogun Warriors. Did any of those cross your plate? And if so, does that have any sort of parallel for you in that job with what happened with G.I. Joe?
No, none. Some of those licenses, probably Transformers and I guess Joe, I know helped the comic book bottom line quite a bit. But none of the properties that you mentioned, you know, impacted anything, you know, that I was doing. I'm surprised to say that Shogun came out before Joe.
Yeah.
Really? Wow. Yeah.
Because Joe's 82, and I think Shogun Warriors is 79. Maybe Mark can Google this while I'm slowly finishing this sentence. All right, so I need to differentiate for myself companies that were licensing their properties to Marvel to make comics with companies like Hanes that might make undershirts or underwear that were going to license from Marvel Spider-Man to put on them. That's what you were doing. That's
yes.
When you say the licensing department, you mean sort of going out from Marvel.
Right, where we were the licensor, the owner of the property, licensing out, we were, you know, bringing money in. The properties that you mentioned did well for the comics, well, you know, Star Wars. I would imagine, you know, helped the company, you know, substantially. I was in the bullpen when, I was in the bullpen because I remember doing production on the Star Wars, those jumbo size. I forgot what they were called. I sold a bunch of them recently. You know, the treasury size editions.
Oh, the comics.
The comics. I'm sorry. Yeah. I did production work on a bunch of those, including Star Wars. Yeah, we immediately when Star Wars came out, we immediately the reprints were just incredible on that. We just immediately starting in reprinting them in all sorts of different forms and stuff. But again, that was probably 77 or something, right? 77, 78 in there. Yeah.
Mark, it sounds like chronologically we're about to get to G.I. Joe. Before we ask the G.I. Joe question, anything so far? Do you have a question for Nell?
No. I think we're sort of making the trajectory towards G.I. Joe happening at this point. So right. I'm sort of waiting with bated breath as to what points in this journey the G.I. Joe license gets on your radar.
Okay, so our program had grown pretty large. We were now probably 5 of us in the department, a couple of account execs doing sales. Doug Pollenbaum was my boss. I was no longer with Saul. The point had come where we grew the department so large that Saul said, you know, we're killing you with all this other extra work, these calendars and all this other stuff. You're going to be part of licensing, and you'll have to go upstairs. So I said, well, let's see. I'm sorry to, let you go and, or say goodbye. I learned a lot about business from Saul. But I was a reasonably smart guy. I figured a lot of stuff out, for myself, budgets and scheduling and that kind of thing. Because a lot of what we were doing, well, I'll get to that later. But so we were doing well, and we heard about Hasbro. I believe this is the way I remember it, and it's been 40 years, I think, or more. Hasbro approached Marvel with their idea for their new revamped G.I. Joe. Okay, they came to us, I believe, in the interest of, hey, Marvel, do you want to do a comic from us for us? In other words, in some rough fashion, do you want to license the rights to Joe to do the comic book? I think that's the way it started. Meanwhile, licensing, we still weren't quite with Joe yet. I think it went through the comics first. I guess Marvel, maybe it was our publisher, Mike Hobson, or maybe Shooter was in charge. I guess Shooter was the editor in chief then. Anyway, it would, sure, let's explore that, that opportunity. And maybe about that same time was, and if we strike a deal, could you guys handle the licensing, the selling of the licenses? Because we, Hasbro, don't have a licensing department. Okay. Well, sure, we'd be glad to. And that's the way I remember it. Those were the seeds of it, from what I remember. I then remember a meeting, I think it was in Pawtucket, at Hasbro offices. I was there, Larry was there, I think Shooter was there, I believe Archie Goodwin was there. There may have been 4 or 5 of us. And I think it was at Pawtucket. I don't remember. And they showed us comps of the new the new concept, this new Joe.
Drawings, comps, you mean drawings?
Yeah. And the old, instead of doing it on a laptop, these days, these are on boards, big boards. And they were drawings of a couple of characters of the Joes, this guy and that guy. And they showed them to us, and the several Marvel guys who were there were just kind of, we were taking it all in. And it just seemed like all at once, we all seemed to say, who do they fight? And the Hasbro guy said, what do you mean, who do they fight? He said, well, if you want us to do a comic book, you need an adversary. They've got to do something. And then that's when I think the floodgates opened for Hasbro realizing we need these guys more than just putting out. We need these guys. And I think it was Archie who suggested, well, how about, and then he just out of his head, an evil organization. Whatever he said, and that's what put us on the track of developing Joe's adversaries. And then it happened quickly after that. From my point of view, Larry was given the task of doing the bios and everything and developing that stuff. Not only because he's an incredibly creative guy, but he had military background and training and stuff, and he served. And while that was going, Hasbro struck the deal with our licensing guys. Okay, you handle the licensing. And it was like, Nell, we're going to be doing licensing with Hasbro, which was great. It just, filled out our plate I believe at a time when Marvel's licensing potency was on the decline, I believe. Yeah, I remember some slow days there while Joe was ramping up. Well, the Joe licensing program was ramping up. That Hulk, Spike, for the time being, we had shot our load. We did a major deal with Mattel because I think Hasbro did a deal with DC. No, Kenner. I think Kenner did a deal with DC, and in response, we struck a deal with Mattel. This was probably in '81 or '82, but it was a very hasty made deal. Mattel really didn't put a lot behind it, and Kenner, I think, did fairly well with the DC guys, I think. Yeah, so we were kind of slow at the time because I remember they asked me to do sales. They said, "No, we've got to put everyone out there we can to do sales." I said, "Well, I'll make calls. I'll do whatever I can." But it was slow for us at the time with the Marvel characters.
Do you remember the first months of licensing G.I. Joe out to third-party companies to make products that weren't going to be Marvel's comic and weren't going to be Hasbro's action figure line?
Right. Yeah, let's call those people licensees. Okay. I do. And it was a real scramble because we had no artwork. We had nothing. And having done this for years already, yeah, what are you going to put on the T-shirt? What are you going to, So, but Hasbro was eager to go, and we flew by the side of by our pants. the seat about pants. Hasbro, and already by the time we actively started getting going, I was working with Bob Prupis and Kirk Bazigian. I'm sure those names ring with you guys. I was 30 or so. Kirk was probably around the same age, and we were on the same page. We knew that we wanted this to be a big success. Obviously, in some way, maybe Kirk was putting his future on this thing. If you're able to take credit for launching a major boys line, that really turns things on the industry on its head. That's a good thing for your career from Kurt's point of view. I mean, I'm just snowballing it now. This is what I'm doing his thinking. For me, it made no difference. No one was going to say, Nell was responsible, for being the the licensor. But for Kirk, that's a big thing, because having a boys license with a major boys toy license was a big thing. Because you had Star Wars out there, you had Marvel, DC, a boys line of action figures was huge. I mean, it was critical to the industry, just as having a major girls line, was to all the companies, whether it was Barbie or some of these other girl things. So in conversations with Kirk, I said, we've got to get guys. We've got to get out. People are selling. We're telling them this is the greatest thing since Swiss cheese. Okay, great. Show me. We have nothing. So the only thing we had to show and to give to people to reproduce, that's the bottom line, was those paintings of the characters that appeared on the blister cards of the action figures, and it was Hector Garrido. I forget.
Yeah.
Garrido.
Yeah.
It was very dynamic stuff. It was good stuff, but I'm thinking, but not everyone could reproduce a fully painted a painting, which is what it was, on their item. On whether it was on fabric, was on. I need line art. I need I need comic book art that you could drop color into. The simplest thing, like for packaging and whatever. Well, whatever. We went ahead, and I would tell Kirk, look, my guys just signed someone to do whatever decals or whatever it was. Give me what you got. He says, all right, get in touch with our ad agency, which I think their name was Sunbow.
Sunbow was the animation company. Griffin Bacall was the ad agency, but the two companies significantly overlapped. Okay,
so I was getting from them C prints, which were good quality prints of the artwork. They made maybe 3x5s of Hector's paintings. And at the time, maybe there were 8 or 10. Yeah, because this was 80, 81. So this was the first year of rollout. So, they had artwork of the figures, of all the figures, I guess, or most of the figures at the time for their first year of the action figures. And whether it was Sun or whoever, I would call whoever was there, whoever my contact was, and said, could you send me 8 sets of everything, of everything you got? So I get a package of all these nice C prints and stuff, and I write a letter to the person who just the company, the licensee who just signed the license with us, and said, well, here's your artwork, let's work together. And I get calls like I'm doing color forms. I can't use this, for those little color forms things. So I told Kirk, I said, this isn't cutting the mustard, and that because we were in the same boat. He was like, wow, what are we going to do? So I started hiring guys to do artwork for these licensees. And I remember working with Herb Trimpe, because Herb, had done, the first comics, and he was also great for doing licensed art because his line work was so solid and consistent and held color very well for simple reproductions and things like that. So I remember for color forms, Herb did that set, and there were a couple of other licensees. I wish I could remember. I couldn't remember for Carson, where I hired. It was probably Herb to do artwork for these people's special project, for for their for their properties, for their items, and so that's how we got by. But it was really by the skin of our teeth. I think Marvel went into maybe the second year. We did a second year of licensing, but I think by the third year, Hasbro had ramped up their own licensing department because they had developed or were doing toys that required or that had risen high enough to warrant licensing on their own. I forgot what the items were, but they had significant toy lines that they could now license those those properties. So they built their own in-house licensing, and I think we did two years. I believe we did 2 years there. But I'm most familiar with the first year's product because the second year product probably came out in the third year, and I was I had left Marvel in December of '83.
Because during like 82 into 83, like G.I. Joe sort of became like pretty much the biggest selling comic, one of the most popular cartoons sort of being shown for the kids with their first miniseries, and also one of the most popular toy lines in the boys' toys market. Were the potential licensees then sort of coming to you and sort of trying to bite your hand off and get a piece of the action?
Yeah, I remember it was immediate. It seemed to be immediate. The response, it seemed to me, was overwhelming. And not that I'm any kind of business whiz, but as soon as I saw what they were doing with Hasbro, I just felt this was it. I had the utmost confidence in Bob. Both guys, and Kurt, of course, because we grew to know each other a little, in dealings back and forth over a period of many months. It was just like these guys are really on the ball, and they they have realistic goals. Their objectives seem real clear, and plus this is a freaking great. It's a great toy. I mean, it's just so clever. The work that Larry did added immeasurably to it gave life to a 3 1/4 inch, 3 3/4, whatever it was, piece of plastic. It all fit together. The team was just the creative team on Joe was terrific, and I tossed so much of paperwork and letters and charts and things that I had just in house cleaning over the years. At times like this, I wish I could pull out and say, look, this is the list of licensees we had by May '82. It was substantial. I'm thinking 25 in the first year. I'm thinking 25. It doesn't mean they had product that year, but they were signed in the first year. That's considerable for a property that's it's untested. Boy playing.
The number I've got for the first year is 23. So yes.
Okay, there you go. Because I remember generating that list and having it, typeset and whatever. But it was
because this was going to be a press release that Hasbro. I can't remember if this was just about the toys or if this was about the cartoon coming a year later. But Hasbro could brag, we have this toy line, we have this comic, we also have 23 companies lining up to do, sleeping bag or stickers or, Presto Magics or lunch boxes and on and on and on. Revell did those model kits,
right,
which were not scaled the same size as the actual action figure and vehicles. And, sometimes I think we fans forget, we sort of take for granted that G.I. Joe was a hit out of the gate, because with 2020 hindsight, we can say, of course it was a hit out of the gate, but a lot of it was Hasbro and partners building the hit. And if, there hadn't been a comic book, there wouldn't have been any story. If there had been the comic book and the toys, but none of the licensees, then, if you went to the store, you'd miss G.I. Joe, right? You'd only see it if you were there where there were comic books or toys. But, I was just at a G.I. Joe convention last weekend, and I had forgotten, and I don't know what year it is, 83, 84, 85, 86, but it's a tiny, tiny bar of soap, and it came shrink wrapped on top of a tiny, tiny gray plastic box, and printed on top of it, I think, is a vehicle painting from 85. And this dealer had 5 of them. And I thought, I need to buy that because that's a G.I. Joe thing that I didn't have as a kid and I don't have as an adult collector. And surely this is going to be cheap because this is a toy convention. This guy's got all sorts of stuff. He's not really focused on just one thing. He's got so many of these, too many of these. What's this going to be? $1, $10? And I forgot to go back, and there's no price tag on them. And also I'm drowning in stuff. So as much as I want to have one more G.I. Joe thing from the 80s, it's actually okay. Also, I guess the argument is I should get 2, 1 to use.
Right.
But like there's this concept in marketing and advertising where you need a certain number of hits of like touch points where the audience, it's like you'll go see a movie or you'll go buy a book if you see or hear the author or the star on like talk shows like 5 times. It's like, oh, they were promoting that on that talk show last night. Like, oh, they're promoting that on this other talk show today. Or, oh, this newspaper has an article about this book or movie. And then you sort of forget. And if it hits you enough times, you think, I'm going to go see that movie. I've heard so much about it. And if you're a kid or a parent in 82, 83, and your kid's talking about G.I. Joe and you're in the other aisle at the drugstore and you see G.I. Joe soap, the kid says, I want that. So you say, oh, little Billy's been talking about G.I. Joe. I guess I'll get him this soap. Right. And it just sort of adds, it feeds the machine, in a good way, I say.
Right.
The machine.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you're right on. And maybe that's, having seen all that starting to come together, I think that's what convinced me that there's a lot of people involved who seem to know what they're doing. And that's why I was really assured it was going to be a hit. In terms of artwork, because that's the thing I was struggling with, daily. I remember sending out kits with copies of the first issue. I special ordered from the printer. I got permission from I don't know who. I said, I need a few hundred copies of Joe 1 for licensing. Can I get it? They said, sure, no problem. We'll ask the printer to whatever. So the boxes came, and I had whatever they were, 50 or 100 in a box. And I was sending out 2 or 3 to each licensee. Like, hey, look, there's exciting stuff that's going on, and this wonderful artwork and this great story. I'm glad you're part of it, and things like that. We were also sending material, not artwork though, because it was too costly. But in order to get someone interested in the property, the manufacturer, I'd send out a comic book generally with a letter. Give us a call. This is going to be exciting. That so and so is aboard. If I could pull out a big name, this is Hasbro. Behind this, the might of Hasbro, and we've got these 2 or 3 licensees. If they had names, like you were saying, oh, really? These people are. Oh, that's worth checking out. So not only were we trying to deal with personally, sales was trying to convince anyone to buy a license, but in my small way, I was doing the same thing of like, let me see if so and so, the guy who does inflatable swim things, pool accessories, and send him a couple of copies and say, we've got Hasbro behind this, Marvel Comics is behind this, check us out. But it wasn't. Yeah, when I left so I was sending out comics. I sent out bundles of the first one, the second, and maybe the third, and then I think I left Marvel in mid-December of '83. In fact, the picture of the Chaotix playing may have been a couple of weeks after I left Marvel, because a couple of weeks after I left Marvel was Christmas, and I remember the band playing at the Marvel Christmas party, and it was like homecoming for me. It was like,
help us out with this timeline, because you're referring to leaving Marvel in '83,
right?
But you continued to, or you went back to color and edit.
Yeah.
So where'd you go? What'd you do? How'd you stay?
Things really got interesting at 80. At the end of 80, as time was going on, I was figuring, again, I was in the same position as I had been several years before. You can't go any further in what you're doing, because you are this director of licensing, the manager of licensing and product development. You're it. I didn't want to do sales. It was open to me. Nell, do you want to do sales? I'm not a salesman. I wasn't. I kind of looked at myself as kind of a creative guy. So I told my boss, who had replaced Doug Pollenbaum, ironically, the guy who is now my boss, his name was Jim Robinson. I had met Jim several years ago when he was running the Underoos program for whatever company owned Underoos. And he and I hooked up then. He was a young guy at the time. And he was coming to me. I was a licensor. He was a licensee at Underoos. And I started working with him to develop whatever Underoos we were doing at the time. And we became friends. Even after the project was over, we'd have lunch, we'd hang out, we'd have a drink together. And suddenly Marvel hires him several years later. So he's now my boss. And I told him, I said, I can't go anywhere here. I'm just like, up against the wall. And I just, it's not like me to hang around. I want something different. I want something, better. So I left in 83. But I'd made so many contacts in the toy industry over the years, and had a decent enough reputation with with a lot of people. Talking toys, electronic toys that talked, were now the rage. There was this thing called Teddy Ruxpin. You guys remember? I think he was a bear, some sort of primate. I don't know what the hell he was, but he talked. He was an animatronic. And I said, you know what? I know people who are doing these toys, manufacturers who manufacture. If I could hook up with the right people, the people to do the software for it, I may have something there. So a few months passed. I was doing some coloring for Marvel, because I left Marvel with at least, I think I was coloring one book. I don't know if it might have been Transformers at the time. I don't know, but I had one monthly book.
Transformers starts in 84.
Okay, then I was freelancing when that started. And that's another story. So, I was coloring one book, or getting enough work for me to say, take a chance. You're young. I wasn't married. I had no fiscal responsibilities to anyone other than myself. And so what happened was I hooked up CBS Toys with a small company that did audio visual stuff. They had started working with CBS Toys to do software, books and tapes for this new toy that CBS Toy was coming out with. And I met with both of these people, and I said, I could be the liaison between you guys, and we could work together. I know the toy industry and all. And we started working together, the three of us. I was brought on, and this group taught me audio visual production. I had a good sense of artwork and things, and design and stuff like that. They taught me how to produce audio. CBS Toy had this toy called Talk and Play, which was a 4-track, it was simple technology. It was a 4-track, it was like a console, and a kid would press one of 4 different colored buttons to change the track on a cassette, which means at any given point, you could switch from Oscar talking to Big Bird talking to that, you get it. So when you create a story, and we did the artwork for the books, you did a story of, let's say Oscar's talking with Big Bird. Oscar's in his garbage can, they're on Sesame Street, and they're having some conversation. The tape would ask you, like, how many garbage cans are there in the alleyway, or something like that? Are there 1? Are there 2? Are there Chris? The green button for 1, press. So the kid would press the appropriate buttons, and because of the way we did the recording, which was real simple, and these 4 tracks, Big Bird could respond, yes, 2 is the right answer, or Oscar to say, nah, that wasn't the right answer. The right answer is 6. We did 40 or 50 of these things, and I became an audio producer, and a pretty decent one too, because I had a good ear for, for voice and sound and music and everything. And CBS sold the toy to, I don't know who, but it ended up with Hasbro, of all people. Hasbro bought Talk and Play, and that's what I was doing for 6 years, said from 83 to about 90, 89, or so. And I was coloring Marvel. So I was in my office on the west side of town, working on a script. We hire writers to write these scripts. Oh, and because of my background in toys, I was working with all the licensees all the licensors that had sold licenses to CBS or Hasbro. So it was the Muppets, it was Fraggle Rock, it was Disney, it was whatever. And we'd get these guys, the licensed voices, to come in, because only one voice could do Big Bird, just one guy. One guy could do Oscar, whatever. We'd get them into recording studios and just record and record and record. And I'd edit the tapes together with an editor. We'd sweeten it with music and stuff. So I kind of developed a second career, much thanks to, this small group called Instant Miracles on the west side of town. But while I was working there, and most of my days were spent in a recording studio, and I loved it, man. I loved that job as much as any job I ever had. Just spending hours in a recording studio, just hour after hour, doing take after take. I loved it. But I'd get a call from Marvel, who's directly across town. I was on 8th Avenue, they were on Park. Hey, Neil, the latest issue of whatever came in. Could you, all right, I'll be right over. So during lunch, I'd walk across town. I'd pick up my pages of, the Transformers or whatever. And so, great, I got a job for the weekend. So I, put in many hours during the week doing audio production, as well as art direction, because we were doing books and script development and stuff, because we had writers doing scripts, and coloring Marvel comics. And I was happy as a pig in mud. I loved it. And again, I still wasn't married. I had a really lovely apartment in Queens, and I was playing music with the guys. So it was, it was really great. But it was audio production during those years. And then,
can you tell us maybe? I was going to say, can you tell us maybe about the process of coloring for a Marvel comic book back then in the mid 80s? So what were you given? What tools did you use? And then I guess it was taken away to get marked up by some techies with all of the coding for printing. So how did that all work?
The color, you would get reduced size of the black and white artwork. Let's say Transformers, because I was doing Transformers at the time. I get reduced size. They're 6x9, so it was pretty much print size. So the original boards were 11x17. I think the art was done. They shrink it down 60 or 65%. So it was 6x9 was the artwork on Xerox paper. So it's just line art on Xerox paper. If I was doing well, let's not do Transformers, because let's say it was a Spider-Man story and he's fighting the lizard, okay? And it was, I was doing, let's say, issue 20. I'd ask, what happened in issue 19? Do you have the color reference for issue 19? Who was the guy in the suit? What was JJ wearing? What was this one? Because if they appeared again in the same scene in the next issue, you'd want that continuity. So the editors would say, okay, I said, I don't need Spider-Man. I don't, I know the main villains. I don't, but tell me all the other stuff. What color was his desk? What color was his chair? In case there was continuity into the issue that I was coloring. And then you take the pages and go home and you color them. Everyone at the time used Dr. Martin's water dyes. It was, Marie gave me my first set. Marie taught me how to color, so I, it didn't happen upon me. She taught me and others how to color. And it was a small set. I think maybe there were 32 colors in it or so. Some colors you had to mix, but because of the very, very, very limited printing process, you really could only print maybe, print well, maybe 25 or 30 colors. You were extremely limited. You couldn't print too dark. You couldn't print too light. Certain browns and certain greens got really muddy and murky, so you knew to avoid those. But you go home and you have a color chart. And at the time, again, real simple, primitive, that this was the scheme used for decades and decades. You had 3 values of each color. You had a 25%, a 50%, and 100% of each of your primaries, your yellow, red, and blue. And using combinations of those, you got ultimately 64 colors. But as I said, you maybe 30 or 35 you choose to use in the context of doing a job. So 25% color was denoted by the number 2. So Y2 was 25% yellow, R2 25% red. A 3, Y3, B3, R3 was 50% of the full color, and the letter itself, Y, R, or B, was 100% of that of the color. So if I was doing flesh was a combination of yellow and red, and the flesh that Marvel used was 25% red and 25% yellow, a blending of those 2 colors to create flesh. So the code for that would be Y2, R2, 25 yellow, 25 red. So when you see coloring, and they were just guides. So when you see coloring guides marked up Y2, R2, and there's a line going to a guy's face saying, like, from the outside the board, that was Marvel's flesh, 25 yellow, 25. Spider-Man's blue wasn't just blue. It wasn't just 100% blue. It wasn't just B. Spider-Man's blue had a little red in it. It had 25% red. So the code for Spidey blue was BR2. Okay. So it was as simple as, because you were dealing with so few colors,
How many pages, how fast were you at a normal clip? How fast were you when there was a deadline problem?
Deadlines, I could do a book in a night. The reason for that is that they paid double rate or rate and a half. So let's say, when I first started coloring, I was getting maybe $15. You start at the lower end, whatever, maybe probably $8 or $12 I was probably getting in 1970, whatever it was, 77. Yeah, 77 I probably started coloring. They start you off, because we had so many reprints and that I was doing the production on, they'd start you off on reprints, because if you bought your reprint story, who's gonna really know?
Just so reprints had to be recolored.
Many were. The Westons were. Some of the Hulk, it came out under the title of Marvel Superheroes. I think that was the Hulk reprint.
This is because you didn't still have what assets in order to use the original colors.
The original book. The original book. See,
the original films.
The original printed comic book.
Okay.
Okay. We would often go to a comic book shop, and if it was within reason, if it was a comic book shop was selling, let's say we were reprinting Spider-Man 110. If within reason, the local comic book shop had Spider-Man 110 for $6 or $7, we say, let's buy the book and cut it up and send it to the printer. And
as
say,
use
these
as reference.
As the coloring guides.
Would you just, you'd recode
we would
it?
do that.
Y2, R2.
Yeah. Yeah. If you did it once on a page,
okay.
If I did flesh on a guy's page in panel 1, I don't have to do it the rest of the on that page.
Okay.
That you sometimes I went overboard, because if I was going for like a khaki or something like that, I wanted to make sure that they got the khaki. So even though the same guy was wearing the same overcoat in all the panels, I might note that khaki code 3 or 4 times rather than just once. Marie was just, she did it once and that was it. Some colors are so obviously, like the Spidey red was 100% red, 100% yellow. So that was YR. Sometimes you didn't even bother doing that, because the printers and the color separators were so accustomed to seeing that red. Whereas a red just R, 100% R, was magenta. It wasn't a warm Spider-Man red. It was a cold red that maybe Galactus has on him. If I'm just, does he have red on him?
Yeah, he's magenta and purple. Magenta. All right, so you would be recoloring a reprint if you didn't have a printed copy of that original comic book
Yes.
as reference. Okay, so so you could do 22 pages. When you say in a night, do you mean like after hours till midnight, or you mean pulling
Yeah.
an all-nighter?
Pulling an all-nighter, getting home
Okay.
from the office, grabbing lunch or dinner, grabbing dinner, and saying, I'm not going to sleep tonight.
Okay.
And stay, for me, that, and many other people. Or maybe
And
some people,
they'd pay double if they needed it the
I
next
think
day.
it was double, maybe rate and a half, but I think double for overnighters. So if your rate was 15, you know, you get 30. But as you over the years, by the time I finished, and I wasn't the highest paid because I was by no means, at the top of the line of, really great colors. If I was getting maybe $35 a page, and I was doing, an overnighter, even if I was only getting rate and a half, it was $50 a page. So that's over $1,000 for staying up all night. To me, that was like, it's worth it. I'll sleep tomorrow.
Okay, so before I ask the Transformers question, so you talked about two limitations. You only have 64 colors, but you can really only use
A
fewer
chunk
than
of
that
those.
anyway.
Yeah.
So as you're coloring, how aware are you? What are you doing to contend with the fact that it's going to be reproduced small? It's going to be reproduced that the separators might make a mistake. That I mean, you've already answered the paper was crummy question, right? Can't use all the colors in your palette, but how were you contending with the next step in the coloring, which is you're not the person who's actually doing the separations. You're not actually the engraver.
Right.
How are you, I don't want to say idiot proofing, but how are you thinking ahead?
Well, a lot of it came to the proper coding, where you want to leave as little guesswork to the separator as possible. That was, that's the way I looked at it. So indicate whether it's a Y2 or a Y3. Don't let it go. Don't assume that they're going to know you want the 25% yellow, because it's important in this case for it to be the 50% for whatever reason. So that's why I kind of went overboard with very carefully marking up what I would do, the colors I would put down. The basic way that I did it, and I guess everyone had their own way, of approaching an entire book, is I go in and I put in all the colors I knew weren't going to change. So I'd get red on my brush, all right, and I do all of Spidey throughout the book. And I go back and do all Spidey blue, unless I saw a panel where I wanted to do some lighting effect, make the red an orange, or the blue a dark gray, something. So I would leave those panels like I'll handle that special effect, that lighting effect or whatever, when I get to it. And then you start going in, and you try to do everything. For me, you did everything. You did all the superhero costumes. You did, if you wanted to put JJ in a dark gray suit, just do, once you have that gray on your brush, just keep on dipping it and do the entire book. So you'd spread out your pages, on a large flat desk. I did it on a flat desk, and take care of all the things that aren't going to require me to think. This is the mechanical stuff, just blasting through this, getting that color in as many places that I know it's not going to change. And then you start going in, and my thing was start at the beginning of the book, start on the splash page, and work towards the end. And it was constantly making decisions. George Roussos, you must be familiar with the name George Roussos. No?
Yeah, he colored some G.I. Joe.
He did color Joe. At the end of his career, he was a staff colorist. He did staff coloring and colored a lot of freelance. But he also inked one of the first 2 or 3 FFs. George went way back. He did work for EC Comics, probably national. He was a very accomplished guy, very understated guy, but he was one of those guys who was great to have in the office. And that was another thing about the office, and not to take steps backwards. But you had all these people together who taught you about the industry, who provided you with a history of where you are. How did you get here? Well, you got here because Jack Kirby was doing this and so was doing that. You know, they help put the right spin on the history of comics in general, Marvel in particular. That was, and so you had this great blend of older folks, 50s, 40s, 50s, and younger kids like myself, people in their 20s, and the old guys are passing down all this wonderful, this heritage, this legacy of the industry. And that to me was just like, oh, so that's why it's happening, and that's what his contribution was. That's what her contribution was. Incredibly rich experience.
When you were coloring G.I. Joe, what reference did you have? Because this was now a toy line. This wasn't Spider-Man, where you just know what colors Spider-Man is.
Right. Joe, I'm pretty sure that by the time, and it was unlike Transformers, by the time a character, Larry was using a character in a book, I had print reference for the color of that character. Like I had a character sheet, something of that character for that character. It might have even been, maybe even packaging art. I don't remember exactly, but I wasn't just trying to come up with things whole cloth. I knew that this guy had a dark green beret or whatever. I had reference for that. That was totally unlike Transformers. Transformers was a bitch. It was a nightmare. And my son, he's now 34. He a few years ago, he says, "Man, you should see what these guys say about your coloring online." I said, "What?" He said, "Man, these people on these blogs and stuff, they just savage your coloring. They rip you. I said, "Who are these people?" He said, "They seem to be a lot of British guys, Mark, who just like hate your coloring." I said, "What are you talking about? I did this how many decades ago?" He says, "No." He says, and he showed me one blog. Some guy wrote, "Nell Yamta should be dragged into the street and beaten." I didn't realize it was such passion about this, but it wasn't my fault. It was not my fault.
What the Brits had was a comparator, because we had British originated work being drawn and colored in a different style.
Yes, and it was done well. It was done well. That was coming from, I guess, Marvel UK, right? Was doing those. Yeah.
I would like to speak for a moment from both sides here. The grumpy Transformers fan and the Nell Yomtov booster. I was aware when I was reading comics from the 80s, in the late 80s and early 90s, that printing was limited. That if on an action figure or a book cover painting or on TV, every little part of a character might be a different color, and the correct color, for some reason, when I opened up an issue of G.I. Joe, sometimes there's a crowd in the background and it's all just red.
Yeah,
it's all just blue, right? It's all a knockout.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to figure out why, because paper is so crappy, and you are aware that the separator with an X-Acto is going to be cutting out Rubylith film in the exact shape of every bit of color or sort of overlapping. It's like, well, I've got a 25% blue here and it touches a 50% blue here. So the plate for the blue is going to be able to have some blue and some more blue, and they're going to be touching, right? So where were the separators? Where were people actually cutting Rubylith for Marvel?
Well, that's the thing. As far as I know, it wasn't Rubylith that they were cutting. That is one way to separate.
Okay.
They were doing a similar process with a special kind of paint. I don't know if it was an orange, dark orange colored, like a brownish colored paint that accomplished the same things as Rubylith did. But they were, instead of cutting Rubylith, they were painting in those areas this thing that prevented light from going through when it was being shot or something.
They were painting onto what surface?
as far as I understand, there were 9 sheets. There were actually probably 10 sheets of acetate, clear plastic. Let's say your top sheet was the black line. So this is clear acetate, was your black plate. You then had, for each value, 3 yellow plates, 3 red plates, and 3 blue plates. Okay.
25, 50, 100.
Exactly. Plus
Percent.
the black plate. Okay.
Yeah.
And so that would give you the whole range of colors that was accessible to you. So instead of putting, let's say they wanted to do, and again, I don't know the technical thing of how all this was photographed, but if you were doing Y2, R2, the flesh with Rubylith on the 25% yellow plate and red plate, you would cut out Rubylith just in the area of the guy's face. That's my understanding. With using this paint, it's kind of a thick paint. You do the same thing on those 2 different acetates with a brush and this paint. It would achieve the same thing, but it was just a different medium that they were using. And from what I understand, that was the medium that had been used for eons. The separations were done in Connecticut at a place called Chemical Color.
Okay. All
They
right.
did all the separations for all the comic book companies.
All right. And for viewers and listeners, when we say separations, right? So Nell colors with a palette of 64 colors, and the separator making separations is separating those 64 colors into the 3 base colors of yellow, magenta, and blue, and then also the black.
Correct.
Okay. So, all right. So back to my sort of defending these 2 sides. So I came into G.I. Joe and Transformers comics, and I was used to how detailed the color schemes were from the toys and the TV shows. And they were not as detailed in the comics, even though in some cases the artwork, the line art was more detailed. And the color wasn't as vivid because it wasn't animation cell paint photographed and then broadcast on a cathode ray tube television, right? It was ink on horrible newsprint.
Right.
And I love newsprint now.
Mm.
And then on top of that, many of the Transformers from issue 1, the colors were not a match for the toys, right? So, character has like a yellow shoulder and a black elbow and like a black forearm. And maybe in the comic, it's like all of it's black, right? Some of it gets simplified, or some of it maybe the first time is a mistake, or the first time maybe is a reference from some artwork provided by Hasbro that's not finalized. And then some of that stuff gets carried forward for many, many issues or the entire series. And so I think some of this is fans were seeing in the Transformers comics color that didn't match their expectations from the toys and the cartoon. I think there were some mistakes because just there are so many characters. And, one of the points that I make when people draw Transformers comics is like, you can draw Spider-Man from any angle. You can draw like a close-up of Spider-Man's shoulder, and we all know what that is.
Right.
But storytelling in a Transformers comic might have to be a little bit more restrained, because if you just show a close-up of a Transformer's shoulder, or a Transformer's shoulder holding like an interesting weapon in a room full of other Transformers, unless it's like Optimus Prime's shoulder, which is totally iconic, most of the audience isn't going to know what they're looking at. Well, I'm looking at a cube, but I don't know whose cube and where. It might be someone's abdomen. It might be someone's foot, right? And so I think anyone who colored the Transformers comic was going to have like one strike against them when it came time for fans to express opinions, right? And then years later, you've got the internet where you can express opinions anonymously or sort of fake bravely. I'm guessing that because it was a licensed book, you had a lot of deadlines. You had a lot of really tight turnarounds on Transformers.
Yeah.
And even more so than G.I. Joe, the Transformers series introduced so many characters who had, like if you squint and you look at a range of GI Joe characters, sometimes a bunch of them are all kind of the same colors, and that doesn't happen as much with Transformers. And so there's just a lot of stuff. And you've only got 64, but maybe really only, I think Shooter said to us it was more like 48.
40,
but
yeah.
Your number, right? 30 or 20. You've got really limited palette to work with. So on behalf of decent Transformers fans, right? I'm sorry. I will say, in the final like 2 years of the series, so Bob Budiansky has left writing Transformers. Simon Furman takes over. Jose Delbo stops drawing the book. Jeff Senior draws a few issues. Andrew Wildman draws the final year. And man, Nell, that final year, chef's kiss, including the paper and the color. I don't know if you had a little more time, or Andrew Wildman's artwork was just a little bit more open or a little bit more animated. Paper gets better somewhere in there around, I don't know, issue 50 or 60. But that final year of Transformers is some of my favorite comic books ever.
It was beautiful stuff. Thanks for having my back. I really appreciate it, Tim.
And I complained a lot about color in comics. Let me tell you,
Yes.
Mark's just nodding because, I have.
Tim cares about colors in comics. I had a thought about as well about another component of the UK Transformers, which might make some of those angry UK Transformers readers opinions more understandable. So I mentioned there's the comparison, but there's also the fact that the weekly UK Transformers was basically A4 sized, so it was blown up at a much bigger size than the standard American one. It's like closer to what you'd call, I guess, is it letter paper sized or whatever. And then the other component is that it's on much nicer paper stock as well. It's on glossy paper, so you can get away with doing more, which is what the UK commissioned work would be. They could get away with full painted art, for example.
Yes, yeah.
So I'm just contextualizing. I'm not an angry Transformers fan, but
I think that for the small vocal percentage of grumpy Transformers fans online who have insulted your professional work on Transformers now, I think those people should compare not only the sort of lesser issues of Transformers to the superior issues of Transformers, but I think they should also compare an average issue of Transformers to like Shogun Warriors, right? There's almost no analog for Transformers at Marvel, because there were a couple, like ROM, there are a couple toy books, there are a couple robot books, but I think Headmasters issue number 1, right, which is the spin-off that shows up around when issue, I forget, 45 of the monthly Transformers is going, right? And Headmasters, the heads become a little robot, the Target Masters, the guns become a little robot. Later on, Power Masters, the engines become a little robot. I think Headmasters number 1 introduces like 45 new characters, because the Transformers go to another planet and they meet a whole bunch of new Transformers, and all of them are 2 characters, because this guy's head becomes a guy, this guy's gun becomes a guy, and they've all got names. And it's sort of like anyone who says that the writing on the Transformers comic wasn't very good. And I think you can have the discussion, you can have the argument about the quality of one Marvel licensed book like Transformers and another one like G.I. Joe or Star Wars or ROM, but Bob Budiansky had to introduce a bunch of characters, and you had to color them all, and it just gets really crowded.
It did. The way I stumbled on getting that gig. I was doing that audio production, And after work day, I'd wander across to Marvel because invariably some guys were going to go out for drinks or for dinner. So 6:30, 6:30, you go into the office, and everyone's still at their, many people are still at their desks and stuff. And I was also going over to wander around to, hey, anybody need a hand with some coloring over the weekend or something like that? Always looking for, pick up a few bucks. And I go in there one day and it's late. It's 6:30, and I'm pretty sure it was a fellow by the name of Michael Higgins. I don't know if that rings up. Mike was a letterer. He was in the bullpen.
Assistant editor on Transformers.
Yeah. I don't think he was ever editor on. Maybe assistant.
I think he's assistant by the end of the second year. So he may have been. I don't have my Transformers issues in front of me.
Yeah, but I think it was Mike. Maybe it was Bob. I don't remember who. And I was walking down the hallway, and this person looked really frantic. And hey, what's the matter? We got this book, and Shooter wants all these freaking corrections on it, and this and that. And he shows me a spread. It's coloring size, and it may have been pages 2 and 3 or something. It was a spread and it was the first issue. And all these little robots, many robots. I forgot what they were crowded around. What? I didn't know what. Then what? That's this thing called Transformers, and it's a toy, and they want these last minute corrections, and the book has got to go to the printer, but Shooter wants it rewritten or he wants it redrawn. Shooter wanted something done on it, and we're running out of time. He says, "Do you think you could color it?" It was a job. It's like how big you finish. They didn't tell me it was a series. It was a book. Maybe Nell helps us out this time. And then they get, they put a regular colorist on it. But Nell happens to be. That's where you got a lot of work in Marvel, especially for colorists and letterers. If you were in the office when someone was in a bind, come in here. I've got 15 pages. Could you do these tonight? Yeah, sure. Yeah. A lot of stuff got done that way. Because books were so frequently late. You grab whoever. You have 2 arms. Come here. I'll give you a brush and some colors, and go have some fun. And that's the way I got Transformers. What I believe I got, and it was the first and only time in 7 years, I'm not snowing you. They gave me some character sketches with colors knocked in marker or pencil of a bunch of maybe these guys who were in this first issue. That was the first and only time I got any legitimate reference on Transformers. What I would normally get once Transformers, I stumbled through that first year. I don't know how. Maybe they were giving me other colors, other sketches, but every year after that, I got a toy catalog. These are the toys for this year. And how does Hasbro shoot their toy catalog? With all these dramatic lighting effects. Purples, reds, greens. And, they're all arranged, the 40 toys this big in a catalog, in a nicely printed, glossy colored catalog on a big spread like this. All these dramatic coloring effects, like these theater effects. Was it blue? Was it teal? Was it green? I knew nothing. The only time I got anything better than that was when they were doing the Dinobots. I think Bobby Chase, was the editor on the book. I don't remember who. They gave me a set of the toys. I had 4 toys. I said, yellow, and the gray. I could imitate the gray, and the spot of red. No problem. I gave the toys to my kids. Those are and I'm not defending any bad coloring or excessive use of knockouts or anything like that. I had nothing. I had nothing. And then to top it off, you mentioned, Tim, the color, the paper got better. They started using, this was the explanation, we're starting to use plastic plates instead of the metal plates that we were using. I don't know, this was maybe halfway through the run. And you'll notice this across the entire Marvel line. The colors printed so brilliantly and so vividly, it was blinding.
This is when the yellows get.
The yellows are like this, and the reds are screaming at you. It's just, I'm used to, like you guys, newsprint. Everything gets flattened out, dulled out, matted. Now the colors. So my yellow that I would have used on whatever on Bumblebee, for example. See how I remember this stuff? Wasn't this pleasant, unoffensive yellow. It was this yellow. It was this yellow. So whenever he would appear on a page, was this. So I said, I can't keep doing this. I've got to, from my point of view, I've got to knock everything back. So my 100%, maybe I'll try for a couple of issues a 50% yellow for Bumblebee, and I'll avoid yellows altogether, or I'll use a 50% red and a 50% yellow for my full-blown 100% yellow, 100% Spidey red, to try to pull everything down where it wasn't just so offensive. And this went on for, it was so frustrating. But the last few, when Andrew, who I adore, he's a wonderful guy, and Mr. Baskerville was doing the painting on it.
Stephen Baskerville.
Steve, I had met those guys going over to conventions in London for a couple of years. That's where I first met them. And all the guys at Marvel UK, we became friends. That stuff was, and the writing was just, man, it was really good. I really enjoyed working on those. But the problem with the characters never changed. It was always the same. So in my defense, I must say, I try. If you have a second, I have a few pages right here.
Yes, please.
Yeah, hold on. Pardon my absence.
I should have had my Mark. I should have had my Titan hardcovers with me. They're down the hall in my bedroom because the two that reprint the final year, and they use the original color films but on glossy paper. Those Titan reprints from, what was it, 2002? So did you get all your color pages back?
Yeah, and I've got 3 left of the thousands of pages that were returned to me.
Wow!
I threw them all out.
Oh, you haven't been selling them?
I never sold them. I threw them out before I realized.
Oh.
When comic book colorists would tell me, "Hey, I sold a book of," I said, "You're selling? People are buying that stuff. They're paying for that." It's
yeah. You mentioned George Rousseau's, and
yeah.
I have a George Rousseau's color guide from G.I. Joe number 26.
Oh, nice!
And it's one of the 2.5 issues that Larry Hama penciled. So the issue, so the
cool.
page looks really great.
Yeah, George, he knew. George gave me, for a very short time, he was made head of coloring. There was switches in the office going on. I think I was on staff at the time. Marie was head of the coloring. She was art director, and then George became head of coloring. And he took me aside one day. He says, it's not rocket science. It's not difficult. He said, Joe, you got to do is remember 2 things. I said, I was just learning. And I said, what? He said, light against dark, warm against cool. He said, that's all. All right. Well, anyway, you mentioned Jeff Senior, and I think these are Jeff Senior pages. And as I said, of all the thousands of pages that were returned to me, I probably got back almost everything I ever colored. I have only 3 left, and they're from a Transformers book. And it's Jeff Senior stuff. I can't tell what issue it is because it's clipped off the Xerox. But anyway.
Oh, that's 75.
Oh, it's 75? Is it?
I think that's 75.
So
Yeah. That's Unicron. Yeah. I might own that page actually.
The original?
I own about 10 pages from 75.
Well, yeah, if you own it, let me know. I'll send you this.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah. Oh wow.
I love coloring this stuff. Jose's stuff was a lot of guys that were tough to color because there was just such detail and stuff. But this was the first time I'd ever seen Jeff's work.
Yeah. This is listeners, these are 3 pages from Transformers number 75 when Unicron has attacked Cybertron and the Autobots and Decepticons are fighting back. I'm going to grab my Itoya folder. 1 second.
See, Mark, you can see the codes I've written.
Okay. Right. Yeah. In that light, you can see them catching up.
So I realize I guess I should have kept these things, but over the years, people have tracked me down on Facebook, and Transformer fans, And we like your work. The 2 or 3 who like my work. We like your work coloring and stuff. I say, give me your address, I'll send you a page. But this was the only book that I ever kept, and these are the last 3. And Jeff, when I was editing Iron Man, I asked, because I just loved his work, and he was such a nice guy. He did an Iron Man story or 2 for me, or a War Machine. I forgot which, maybe War Machine. He did an issue or 2 for me. Such a nice guy. One of the things, I had no contact with any of the British artists until I started going to UCAC. It was a convention.
Yeah.
So I think
UK Comic Art Convention. Yeah.
Yes, that's.
I used to go back in my youth.
So when would you have been going?
It was like I was towards the back end of it when it was just the last few, so it was like 95-ish.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I went in 91. Yeah, the first year I got back to Marvel, 90, I went. 91, 92. I'd been to England a number of times. I just love the country. But that's where I met those. Is that the original?
Yeah.
All right.
That's one of the pages you just held up.
Yeah, email me your address and I'll send you.
Oh, cool! Wow.
Mark, if you'd like, give me your address and I'll post something to you.
Wow, thank you.
And so I met a bunch of the UK creators, and Dan Abnett, Lanning, all those guys. Oh yeah, wow, that's a beautiful page. You let me know which one you want.
Thanks.
Yeah, that's a nice page. Yeah, and so when I had a chance to use them, because when I went back to Marvel in '90. I went in as an editor for Epic, which was the creator-owned branch, and we had a lot of projects going with British creators. So I met a lot of those guys there, and then I would see them in England or whatever. But Stephen did the last issue of, I think it was ForceWorks that I was editing. It was I think it was issue 25 when the book ended. And I think he says it's the best piece of work that he's ever done. He did a beautiful job. And again, he was in New York. I needed an artist, and he was in New York visiting, maybe sightseeing, and trying to put together some work. He was up at the Marvel offices. We had met in the past and knew each other. I said, "Can you have time to do an issue?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Okay, it's yours. Here's the plot." That's the way stuff was picked up. It's just
Are you now? Are you sitting on an unpublished ForceWorks cover by any chance? Because the final issue of ForceWorks, which for our listeners is what Avengers West Coast turned into when it got awesome. The final issue of ForceWorks has a cover by Wildman and Baskerville, and the second to last cover is by Mark Bright. Wow. And I feel like one of those 2 issues has a blurb for an upcoming issue in the letters page, which shows a small drawing, and then that issue didn't get published.
Wow.
I mean, I also know that's a general Marvel phenomenon where there were inventory issues that were ready to go that never got published because the series was canceled before they needed another fill-in, or there was some material that was ready to go and then the series ended. I guess I've answered my own question. You're probably not sitting on any unpublished ForceWorks artwork.
No. That thing became such a problem, that book. Not to digress, but finding artists was just like every month it just seemed I was looking for someone new. The artist who I started it with lasted only 4 issues. He kind of abandoned me, and I was just left scrambling. Although I love the writing, whoever I got did a good job. I did not know I had Mark Bright do an issue. I have no recollection of that at all.
A cover. Second to issue 21. It's in my Mark Bright box down the hallway. All right, so you just mentioned when you came back to Marvel. and you were working on Epic. Did you work with Mike Vosberg on his Epic series?
No,
Okay.
I don't know.
There's another G.I. Joe alum.
Right. Mhm.
So tell us what brought you back to Marvel and how things were different.
Oh, good. That's a darn good question. So things were rolling along really well with the audio production and these talking toys. The technology behind it was you have an audio cassette, with whatever story is being, was narrated. And there was I think it was an inaudible tone, went beep, and it triggered the character's mouth. So there was something between putting the cassette in the character's rear end or whatever the thing was.
I think Teddy Ruxpin's cassettes went into his stomach.
Yeah, I think Big Bird was something. It was elsewhere. But so it would activate this mouth. Well,
I've got a really good story for you, and it's all about me, who looks exactly the way that I look. Me, and I am reading who's holding the book. Me, firm as a feather in all kinds of weather. Me, wonderful me.
Sesame Street's Big Bird story magic from Ideal with storybook and cassette. The way your kids react to him speaks for itself.
they were real hot. There was a talking Big Bird who I was doing all this audio stuff for, and the dolls were so cute and lovable that the kids loved to play with them, mangle their faces and stuff. And after a while, the returns on broken toys was becoming extremely high. And these in those days, the toys were $65, $75. It was a lot of money for a kid's toy that did nothing other than this. I mean, you really couldn't play with it because it was kind of delicate. But the kids were smashing up inadvertently, they were breaking the mechanisms. So the company started getting all these returns. So the manufacturer saying, it's hardly become worth it. Maybe we just, we shot our shot and let's move on to something else. This was a fad. We'll move on. But when they did that it affected my audio production business drastically. My son had just been born. He was born in July of '89. This was going in the toilet, around that time. So I found myself with very little work, except the Marvel coloring that I was still doing, a book or two, whatever. And so things were getting desperate. My wife took off work, and we had to move. I had to sell the co-op because we moved. The rent was extraordinary. We were renting a house in Forest Hills in Queens. So there was all this personal stuff going on. But the bottom line was you need some money, buddy, because we agreed my wife would take a couple of years and stay at home with with Jess and stuff. So but I was continually going into the city from Queens. The Marvel, because it was the only place I really knew how to, where I could get work, and I was getting like a story in Marvel Presents or something, just grateful for everything I could get, because like I said, they were top of the line colors like Christie Shield and others that rank. They were artists. I was a colorist. I had no illusions of me being as good as them. They were extremely, extremely good at what they did. And so I would continually go into the office looking for work, to the point where it's probably becoming a real big pain in the ass. But everyone knew Nell, and Nell come in, sit down and talk. And I went up to the office one day, and it was a coffee shop on the corner, and I was really getting stressed out, with the money thing. And I ran into Danny Fingeroth, who was, you may know Danny. He wrote a book about Stan Lee. He was the editor of Marvel. He wrote comics and the whole thing. And a real sweet guy. And I knew him for many, many years because he used to work in the British department in the 70s, as did Bob Budiansky. And so it's talking outside this coffee shop, and you know what you do. Yes, that a real fluff piece from what I understand. But Danny's a sweet guy. And so I told him, I said, look, I gotta be honest with you. You're an old friend. I said, I really gotta find something, man, because things are getting kind of tight. I'm getting really stressed out. And he said, there's gonna be some changes at Marvel. So, and he left it at that. And I said, well, thanks. So several weeks pass by and I get a call and I'm out in Queens and it's Tom DeFalco. He said, hey, Neil, it's Tom. I said, yeah. How you doing, Tom? How's everything? He's got some big changes going on here at Marvel. And then dead silence. It's like, yeah, you're interested in coming back? I said, do what? He says, so-and-so is leaving. We're looking for an editor and da-da-da. I said, Tom, look, I've never edited, He says, no, come up for an interview. So I interviewed with him and Carl Potts and Buddy Yansky. And I was showing them samples of all this toy stuff that I had done, which had nothing to do with, the comics. They knew what I had, that I was coloring and all. And but they hired me on the spot. They said, you want the job, it's yours. The medical plant. I'm in. You can pay me in bananas, but I'll be back. And so they took me back, and it was epic. It was the creator-owned stuff solely. It was just epic projects. And Tom told me, he says, some of these things are just, these guys aren't delivering the work, and we've paid them for it. We hope you can, do something about that. So I said, sure. So, I had an office. They gave me an assistant, and we got to work, getting familiar with, these projects, some really good ones, some really good artists. But for these guys, just a couple of guys were just not delivering their work on time. And we had already given thousands of dollars in advances against royalties and stuff. And I just remember having some heated discussions with a couple of guys, like, turn in the work and what have you. And there was I was working on one book with Alan Grant, who was a wonderful, wonderful guy, real talented writer. He became the go-between between me and this artist who wasn't delivering the work. And Alan was just, he was telling me, no, the fellow has, some personal issues and stuff. And I got really heated, and I'm pretty mild. I've only lost it a couple of times in business and stuff. I said, but doesn't he realize that he's stolen money from the company? I understand he has, personal issues or something. Let him return the money. I'll send him back whatever art he's given us, the few pages of the hundreds that he owes us. And I'll give him back, let him give me back my money. We'll call it, we're done. It's, it didn't work out. So there were those kind of issues. But in the course of it, I also met a whole cadre of guys like the Lannings and a couple of guys who did, it was a takeoff on the Blues Brothers. You remember that, Mark? It was a comedy thing, satire on the Blues Brothers.
Yeah, Sleaze Brothers.
The Sleaze Brothers, yeah. John Cornell? Does that ring a bell? John Cornell is the writer.
I thought that was, maybe the writer. I thought that was, like Dan Abnett, Andy Lanning.
Lanning drew it, I think. Lanning drew it. Abnett didn't have anything to do with that.
Okay.
But anyway, I met a whole bunch of
drawn by Andy Lanning.
Lanning did it, yeah. And so that was my introduction. And then I would, shortly thereafter, I was in England meeting these guys face to face. And it would and from there on in, and the reason, Tim, you're really astute about those last issues of Transformers. You're really spot on with that, because you said, well, maybe you had more time. That was exactly the case, because those guys were delivering the books. The Brits, from that point on, they were the only guys I could rely on. If they said you're going to have the book on Friday, I had the book on Friday, bar none. Other than those first few epic experiences, that's why the book looks, that's a reason why it may look good to you, because it was always on time. And every time I colored those books, the lettering was on the boards. They weren't pasted up. And you guys know what that's all about, right? Lateness, the letters, the book, and the artwork isn't even done yet. The pencils are, but the inks aren't done. And if I'm correct, all that Rick Parker lettering on those last issues was on the board. That was another thing about coloring the check. I'm pretty sure about that. I could be wrong. It wasn't. They were paste ups on the Jeff Senior work.
Yeah, I'd always assumed that the final year was all paste up because it was penciled and inked in Britain, and it wouldn't make sense to ship it to New York to get lettered and then ship it back to Britain to get inked.
You're
'Cause
right.
I have a Wildman page here. Wildman page is over there.
Yeah, you're
but
perfectly right.
are you saying is coloring is coloring it harder or take longer, or you start later if the lettering is on an acetate overlay because someone has to like in making the photocopy for you to color, they have to like do whiteout or something
Well, here's
to
what happens.
combine the lettering with the art?
If there's no lettering on the copy that I get to color, see, because I had enough time, although you're right, they wouldn't have sent it back for inking, but they had the time in the schedule to paste up Rick's lettering on an ink page. So that's what I got to color
on the actual boards, not
Yes.
on a separate acetate
sorry,
overlay. Okay.
So by the time I got the coloring, and that was the responsibility of the artists and the editor, Rob.
Tokar.
Rob
Tokar.
Another really nice guy. Those guys are on schedule all the time. So whenever I got the coloring, not only did I have not only was the lettering on the board. See, because if the lettering isn't on the board, I don't know what's going on. If the lettering isn't on my copy of the coloring, which was very frequent, I didn't know what was going on. So you have to ask the editor, can I have the plot? Because the book could have been in the process of actually being scripted, but at least there was a plot. Can you tell me if this is day and night? You know, see what I mean? Can you tell me who this character is?
Yeah, sometimes on original artwork, the artist will write a note. You know, it's like color : or colorist.
Yeah.
Inside submarine, all red, or like nighttime. But yes, if you don't have the lettering or you don't have the plot, you're guessing, and if you guess wrong, someone may make you do it again, or the coloring just may not be as good as it could be,
right?
Or there's an error, and then the readers don't like it.
Yeah, or you don't get a call back for another job. You blew the last one. I'm sorry. We're gonna go, that kind of thing.
Okay, so my sense of the sort of second, like, to me, Epic had two waves at Marvel. There's the early years with Archie Goodwin and Epic Illustrated, and that sort of culminates in the American publication of Akira, which then pauses and finishes up later when Otomo's done with the movie. And then there's what I think of as this second wave of Epic, which is like the Howard Chaykin book. Was it Midnight something?
That was mine. I did that.
And the Ron Lim book, Dragon Lines, and the I think Mike Fosberg's Offcasts was in the second wave, but I'm not sure. But there was this second wave of and I thought it was around 1990, and I remember that second wave of Epic not lasting that long. Was it 2 years?
No, it lasted until 95, I believe.
Okay, but was it sort of stretched
it was
out?
Spread out? Yeah, it was run by Carl Potts. Carl Potts.
Okay,
that was his department. Yeah,
but you were an editor in that department.
Yes, and by the time for me personally, I got out of Epic because the guy who was editing Iron Man and Associated Books was leaving. So he said, look, Mel's doing a decent job, but let's get him into the superhero thing. Because not to say that one editor was more valuable than another, but maybe that's what the perception was. Do the superhero books, let the creative stuff, because the creative stuff was always fraught with issues of exactly what I was saying, people not delivering work, and then you being stuck, powerless, impotent to do anything about it. But superhero books, the guy didn't deliver his book, he was gone, and I had someone, that evening, as a replacement. So I got into, it was Iron Man and Avengers West Coast, a couple of other titles, and someone else must have taken the Epic stuff. However, within a couple of years, Marvel editors started getting Epic projects to do. The superhero editors started getting. I remember I took a ton of them. Danny Fingeroth had something called Charlie and Flytrap, but I did many of them. I did the Midnight Men. I did a series with with Phil Gascoigne. Phil Gascoigne. It was called Dreadlands. I did something called Mutatis. I was constantly working with a lot of the British guys, and then it just petered out. I think by '96, I don't even think it existed anymore. By the time
while you were an editor both at Epic and for the Iron Man books, Marvel was still in this phase, because this didn't end at Marvel until 2000 or 2001.
Mhm.
That editors were expected or encouraged or allowed to write freelance scripts for Marvel Comics for other writers, right? So Larry was editing Conan. Larry was writing G.I. Joe.
Right.
Oh, Bob Harris was editing X-Men, writing Avengers.
Yes,
I forget the timeline there. So
Yeah.
You mentioned before, like maybe a little thing like Marvel Comics Presents. Were you also writing any? Did you want to? Were you encouraged to?
I did. I started writing. I don't know what my first assignment was, but I started writing the Junior Spider-Man books that were based on the animation. So Spider-Man Adventures.
Oh yeah.
And then when that series got canceled, there was Adventures of Spider-Man. I think it was two different series under two different names. But I was also doing work for Marvel Presents. I wrote a number of 4-part series for them. I was using characters that were under my editorial umbrella, like Spider-Woman and Hawkeye. I wrote some stories for Marvel Comics Presents. I scripted a Namor annual, I think. Yeah, I did a bunch of writings.
So your experience at Marvel is wide ranged. You were in production, you did creative stuff, you did editorial, and then coloring is sort of half creative and half production.
Right.
Because some of it is just plugging in colors. Do you feel like your writing at Marvel was getting to a certain level? Is there a great Marvel story that you never got to tell? Was it just like one more interesting thing to do and it was a good paycheck? How do you think of your writing at Marvel?
I think it was another experience that I had. I never fancied myself a terrific fiction writer. I mentioned my interest in fiction wasn't that high. I never considered myself a very, very, see, the movie adaptation, the animation adaptations, the weekly animation was perfect for me because it helped me refine my writing skills, especially, script, dialogue and narration. The story was there, but I was free to present it in any way I wanted, in Nell's language. So that helped me develop a voice, if I would have one. But I kind of was looking, and this was very late in my Marvel career, as had always been from the get-go, to gather experiences that I found interesting and fulfilling and challenging. So I saw my writing as something like that. Someone's given me an opportunity to do this. I can turn it down and say, no, I don't fancy myself a writer. Well, you can try to see if you can. I don't fool myself. I know what, my strengths and my weaknesses are. I think it was, of the latter of what you said, it was something interesting that Marvel offered me, and and the money was good. But hey, you're working 9 to 5. You go home and you're working another 5 or 6 hours. No one's handing you something for free. The higher ups in the company at one point, they thought we were making too much money, forgetting that, really forgetting, and we were fairly well paid as editors. Our staff job was fairly well paid. But to make extra money, you give up your evenings, you give up your weekends, you give up holidays, you give up family time. There are sacrifices. It's like I said, they're not handing you, money for nothing. But they thought that we were overpaid. Some of the higher ups thought we were overpaid, forgetting the fact that we had no life. we were sacrificing an enormous amount of our lives to make a decent, a nice, nice, comfortable living. So yeah, the writing, I write now. So, my mom, and I write a lot of graphic novels. It's all nonfiction, but they're graphic novels. So, Marvel afforded me the opportunity to find a voice and learn that skill. It's different, but it's different editing, obviously, being on the inside and being on the outside.
I do want to ask you about what you write now, but since you were on your sort of editorial life at Marvel, do you feel like as an editor at Marvel, you had a particular strength, or is there something in your time as editor that you can point to and say, I made that call, I found that person, I put that person on that book, I put this project together? What are one or two sort of editorial peaks for you at Marvel?
I did find some guys and gave them their first jobs. The War Machine armor, for example, right? It's become popular and it's a cool thing and everything. When the plot was given to me,
Ken Leminski?
Len Kaminsky.
Len Kaminsky.
Len Kaminsky. I knew Len when he was an assistant editor when I first met him, and then he left staff and went freelance, to write. Anyway,
he's gonna kill Tony Stark.
Oh, that don't.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
No.
You tell your story.
I'll tell you that story.
No. War Machine armor.
Right. So I was enjoying what Len was doing. He was a good guy to work with. He had good ideas. He knew technology and stuff, nanotechnology and stuff. So he knew stuff. He knew stuff. And Kev was on the book. And again, working with these British guys, the books were on time. You need changes. You want change. It was just so pleasant. And Kev was a really good guy. And but the script, Kev Hopgood, yeah. The script called for. Len described the armor, it's kind of whatever. But he said that the armor's coloring should be yellow and blue. I said, I was really excited. He was talking about, this heavily armored, colored yellow and blue. And I just said, man, no, it can't be. It's too primary. So I was thinking the old Oakland Raiders football team, they were this black and silver. They had black and silver uniforms, and they were regarded, at least in the 60s or 70s when I was following football, as the meanest SOBs on a football field. I mean, rough, tough, bearded, monstrous. And I said, that's what it's got to be. It's got to be the Oakland Raiders. So I changed that in the script. And I spoke to Kev. No, I didn't tell him. No, so this is good. So I don't know if I told Len, I don't know what I did, but I said, no, it's got to be this color. This is what happened. Kev was in New York at the time. He was already on the book. He started penciling this. This is what happened. He started penciling this issue. So I kept in mind when I saw the plot, yellow and blue. I guess I made a mental note. I said, no, it can't be. It's got to be this other thing. So Kev happened to be in New York at the time. So I set him up at a drawing board right outside my office, and he starts penciling the book. And I said, look, do some sketches about how you perceive, the new armor, this new War Machine armor, and we'll take it from there. We'll run it past Len. We'll talk about it. He starts doing some sketches, and because he's only working from the plot, he starts putting in yellow and blue on his pencil sketches. And I was walking out, and I looked, and I said, no. It's black, kind of black and white, but it's black and silver. It's real gray, think gray, black. So that's what he did, and that's what it. And my notes to the colorist was, it's this, as best as our shitty coloring, pardon the language, could approximate black and gray, do it that way. So in the books, he was essentially black and white, light blue highlighting. Because if I had made them all gray, it just would have been murky. It would have been like the original, Iron Man armor, nothing really distinctive. But that caught on, man. That was uh, that was, yeah, that really caught on quickly, and it had a lot to do with the coloring. It just did. I think it just made it a very grim kind of, we mean business. The yellow and blue was just not for that. I think he had a yellow and blue armor at some point, didn't he? A space armor or something. I don't remember. Before my time, I thought he did. But that was my one major contribution to comic book, though. And I did find some artists. Went on to do some nice things and stuff over the years. I met a lot of these guys at cons, and but that editorially, that was I would say that's the feather, that big deal. I picked the coloring on it. But when he got in the movies and stuff, my son would go, hate that. Yeah.
So yeah, what kind of your final thoughts on maybe your time at Marvel, and if you're able to link that back to G.I. Joe, that would be perfect in a nutshell.
Well, I was real fortunate. I knew it was my time there was really like catching lightning in a bottle. It really was, for the confluence of people, the experience of the older people, the eagerness to learn, to absorb the craft and the history of the younger people. It was a wonderful group of socially. We played baseball together, softball. We hung out. It was a really terrific experience, and having been given the opportunity to really, maybe unlike anyone there, before or since, I went through the whole company. I went from the grunts in the bullpen, to the executive floor, whatever, suit and tie, and doing some business traveling and and such. I was given those opportunities to do different things, and I'm very grateful, for those things. But Joe was particularly important because it showed our ability, Marvel's ability, to be flexible in its business thinking. It's not just about us. It's about introducing properties and product to an audience beyond the comic book audience. And that's one of the things that Joe did. Larry's book, as Transformers did, it brought in non-superhero people and non-comic book people into the Marvel fold. Many people now, young kids tell me, "Oh, Transformers was the first book I bought, and then I got into G.I. Joe was the first comic I read." Yeah, it brought a lot of young people into the industry, and Joe being a very small part of just the massive success of what that was, and what it became and how well it was managed by the guys at Hasbro, and to a lesser degree us. But I mean, it's a historic time in toy manufacturing, in toy marketing was what those guys did up at Hasbro, and it was it was nice working with them. I have really fond memories of them. Going through the the problems that we face, the challenges that that we face. As I was mentioning before, and seeing the ultimate success that it had. It was really gratifying. But I grew up at Marvel. I learned business at Marvel. I met my wife at Marvel. My best friends are still Jack Norelli, Mark Chiarella, Larry. I played in a band with for 10, 12 years. Mark Wright, the same thing. They were just they were very, very lasting friendships and relationships that I would not have had. And had Stan told me, "No, there's no place for you to go," I would have been gone. I would have gone back to school. It was Stan and Stahl saying, "Yeah, we'll take a chance." Sure.
And these days, for our audience, if they wanted to find you or check out your latest endeavors, where should they go? What should they be looking for?
They could go to Amazon and just search my name, and you'll see the books that I've written. I've written probably close to 300 books, all nonfiction. Some, many, maybe half or a little bit more, are graphic novels. A lot of pretty much all have to do with history because that's my passion. I've got a couple of very steady clients, and I haven't held a staff job in about 12 years. The last thing I did was I was the editorial director at Hammond Map, the book the Map publishes. And since then, I just decided, stick with freelance and work out of the house. So that's what I've done. And I'm grateful for the fact that I'm busy pretty much all the time writing, which is and it started at Marvel. I didn't write before then. I wrote college stuff, but nothing to to entertain or educate. And it's for a young audience, which I like.
Do you still play harmonica?
I do. I fiddle around a little. I don't play with any bands. I do have a set of drums that I occasionally play, but I do. Yeah, I still play harmonica a little. That was, it's that kind of self-taught things. I guess I picked that up from my father mostly. As long as you're here, just learn stuff. If you go into business, ask that guy what he's doing. How does he do it? Ask questions. Look to make life more interesting for yourself. And I think that was the bottom line of my experience at Marvel that spanned many years. Was that opportunities presented themselves, and I tried to make the best of them. For myself. And even now, like meeting guys like yourself. Hey, 20 years ago, if you asked me, hey, you're going to be interviewed about something you did, when you were 30 years old. I said, what are you kidding me? So obviously, something that I did, I'm not impacted people, and that's gratifying. Something that I did impacted in a positive way people, and it's what more could you ask for?
More than I guess anyone can hope for, really.
Yeah, it's like you guys. Without realizing it, you're reaching an audience, and people they're gonna remember this. And if years from now, hey, I used to listen to those two guys, and it was interesting stuff, and they fed my passion and things.
But I'm gonna tell them right now to buy some Nel Yomtov historical graphic novels.
Thank you.
And history books right now, Talking Joe listeners.
Thank you for the plug.
That's good too. And if this is happens to be the first time that you've stumbled across Talking Joe as a listener, talkingjoe.co.uk is the website where you can find out more about us and delve on through our archives and find us talking to lots of interesting people all about G.I. Joe and more besides. Tim, where can people find you when you're not talking about things G.I. Joe?
Video essays on TV and film at our YouTube channel, Atomic Abe Productions. My brick and mortar comic book store in Somerville, Massachusetts is Hub Comics, and I write about G.I. Joe at arealamericanbook.com. Very
good. And is there anything I'm forgetting? No, yes. I think to wrap up.
Nel, thank you so thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate it greatly. Thank you.
That was the thing. It was to say thank you, Nel, for responding to my initial request. Thank you for coming on with us, and thank you for being so generous with your time and sort of telling us all of this great, this sort of illuminating stuff from someone who was there, and particularly with you, such a broad and varied sort of experience across the both comics industry and beyond. But I think that is us done, which only leaves us to say that
Nel, this is a variation of the 1988 G.I. Joe toy advertising jingle. Nobody beats Talking Joe, an international podcast.
Latest.
Wonderful. Guys, thanks so much, man.
So funky, so nice, it's G.I. Joe merchandise. Do you need it? Sure you do. It's G.I. Joe branded, fool. What shall we make? We can't decide. Pick some old crap and put Flint's face on the side. It's G.I. Joe merchandise.